Welcome to the Lifestyle First podcast, discussing lifestyle medicine and making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. One question, 2 research reviews, and 3 actionable health tips, all centered around the Lifestyle First method, your blueprint for the 10 key routes of optimal health and happiness. And now your host, lifestyle medicine physician and coach, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hello and welcome to Series 6, Episode 5 of the Lifestyle First podcast. And the theme we're focusing on today is S for sleep. And the one question that we're asking is, how can I get more deep sleep? To answer that, I would like to introduce you to my guest today, who is Daniel Gartenberg. He's TEDx speaker with TED Residency with his talk, The Brain Benefits of Deep Sleep and How to Get More of It. Now, Daniel's talk went viral with over 4 million views, and he's got a PhD in human factors and applied cognition psychology. And he's an adjunct professor at Penn State with 15 years experience in the sleep space. So Daniel, a very, very warm welcome to you. I'm so delighted to be speaking to you today because sleep is absolutely my favorite topic of discussion. So great to have you here.
Thanks, Alka, for having me. I really appreciate the great introduction.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, it went viral with 4 million views with your TED Talks. There's definitely lots to talk about, isn't there? So deep sleep.
Everyone loves sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if we're talking about deep sleep, I think it would be maybe helpful to start with understanding perhaps kind of the various stages of sleep. And when you say deep sleep, what do you actually mean?
Yeah, and that's actually, it seems like a simple question, but it's more complicated than you might think. A great example of how complicated it is that in America, there are 4 stages of sleep, but in a country like the UK, where you're at, the scientific community has said that there's 5 stages of sleep. You know, a lot of times in science, we sort of put arbitrary categories behind physiological phenomena that are a little bit more complex than these gross categories. And, you know, it cleans out damaging cleans out cells in your brain. It helps you remember things. It increases human growth hormone. It's associated with, you know, if you don't get deep sleep, you'll not remember things as well the next day. It'll result in cardiometabolic syndrome more likely. You'll have your cardiovascular system will get more pressure. So it basically is correlated with almost every health outcome.
And you know, you're absolutely right, and that's what fascinates me so much about sleep is that we do sleep for so many functions, don't we? Which mean that actually lack of sleep also then impairs so many functions you've touched on, sort of memory and immunity, even things like malignancy, our appetite, even down to our DNA. It's sleep that's protecting our DNA as well, isn't it? So you're talking about regenerative sleep. So when we talk about light sleep and deep sleep, to keep it at its very, very, very simplest, deep sleep is about all that regeneration that you need.
Well, a couple things there. Basically, the way you think about it is deep is good and REM is good. So those are both quality sleep. As we get older, we get less deep sleep in particular, and that's what I study. But both REM and deep sleep are, you know, regenerative stages of sleep. And when we think about, you know, quality is a huge thing, but I love what you just spoke about, which is that just the quantity, just getting enough sleep, that's what's correlated with a lot of the health outcomes. And while, you know, or the quantity of your sleep, but the quality matters. But first and foremost, folks should just make sure they're getting the quantity. And then after we ensure that, then we'll start focusing more on things like quality sleep.
Because we are in the midst of this epidemic, we're in the midst of a pandemic, of course, we all know about that, but there is an epidemic of sleep deprivation, which is exactly that. We're not even getting the actual quantity of sleep. Do you think some of this is self-inflicted? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. So we in our software sleep space, we can look at population trends. Mm-hmm. And Funny enough, there's the World Health Organization before COVID issued that sleep deprivation was a public health epidemic. And, it's even if you're a shift worker, that's associated with having like a hazardous job, basically, from the World Health Organization. So it's a huge problem. And funny enough, the pandemic in our data actually showed that it helped people sleep more, because we didn't have those pressures from our work-life balance. And a lot of this is our culture, our Western competitive culture of I'll sleep when I'm dead. The city that never sleeps, New York, where I'm located. We have this culture where people don't sleep enough, basically, and 40% of people don't sleep enough. And that's also in the next 20 years going to cause probably the next global epidemic, which a lot of scientists say is going to be Alzheimer's disease, because that not getting that quality sleep, and that's actually going to cost the U.S. healthcare system more than anything else in the next 20 years. But I digress.
Yeah, no, but let's just stick to that actually, because Alzheimer's is an important area to speak about. Yes, we are living longer, but what are we living with? And the stats are pointing to memory loss, memory impairment, dementia as being, really, really rife as we get older and older. But there are ways to try and reduce these risks, aren't there? Or reduce the kind of the possibility of dementia and Alzheimer's. And sleep is massive, plays a massive, massive part in this. Can you explain some of the kind of pathophysiology behind it? I love to kind of talk about what's going on in the brain, because I think if you understand what goes on in the brain, you're more likely to take the action that kind of helps you with some of those lifestyle changes that you can make. So maybe just kind of touch on that link between sleep and Alzheimer's. What is that about?
Yeah, I mean, so deep sleep in particular, and this is what our grant-funded research with the National Institute of Aging is all about. Mm-hmm. Some recent findings showing that, a lot of the Alzheimer's drugs didn't seem to work. And the funny thing is, it would be funny if it wasn't drugs the whole time, it was just getting a deeper night of sleep. And that's what convergence in the science is showing, where these beta amyloid plaques that are associated with forming, with getting Alzheimer's disease, deep sleep sort of, just in simple terms, cleans those out. And there's a convergence of, mice studies and fMRI studies and correlational research, all pointing to the fact that when we get more regenerative deep sleep, and you're less likely to have Alzheimer's disease. And the effect is pretty strong on a population basis. And there's also evidence, like causally, in terms of mechanisms and how the brain works. And I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm a cognitive psychologist, so I don't understand all the details of it, but we work with people that do, thankfully. And there's a lot of evidence essentially that we're sleep depriving ourselves to the point where we basically become not functional in the future. And it's a lot of it has to do with our work-life balance and sort of societal norms that can be changed, but there's also things that every person can do to address this problem.
Yeah. It's when you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, thinking about memory changes and Alzheimer's and dementia is not on your radar at all. And actually you tend to wear kind of sleep deprivation as your badge of honor, don't you? Look at me burning the candle at both ends, and look what I can achieve in my wakeful hours, and on you go. But you don't think about what is actually the impact of that in 40, 50 years' time. And when you look at some of the giants that kind of we know, and thinking about people like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who outwardly say, I don't sleep much, I'm here for my country. Both of them, what was their end point in life? It led them towards dementia, didn't it? So there's some, real kind of...
Oh, I didn't make that connection. Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Huh.
Yeah. No, exactly. And
I think about it with he who shall not be named, the Mr. Trump. Like, he definitely seemed sleep deprived a lot of times when I was looking at him. Yeah. And it makes you make rash decisions. And it's funny, I remember being in college and, staying up all night, cramming for the test. Mm-hmm. and then not doing so great on some people can do this. I'm not denying it, but generally speaking, getting a better night's sleep will prepare you much better for the next day. So it's really a false myth that sleeping, because sleep is how we process the world in simple terms. I ascribe to something called the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, which sort of lays out how sleep is used to process information. And it's this interchange between deep sleep and REM that's really responsible for this.
Wow, that's very interesting, that homeostatic regulation.
Synaptic homeostasis hypothesis.
Right. Okay. Yes. I got to remember how to say that. We're just picking up on something else you said when you were talking about emotions and making hasty decisions, and that's really key, isn't it? Because actually, you're right. Your sleep signals. Your sleep is very much associated with emotional processing, and yet people don't make that connection either. When you wake up and you're irritable with your partner or sending that angry email, you don't relate it back to that deprived night of sleep that you just had at all. And it is so important to start making these connections with what is fundamentally meant to be a very natural process for us, right?
Exactly. And like I sort of always have this metacognitive process in my brain of like how much I slept. And I'm like a healthy psychology or something, but based on my sleep, I can clearly dip into like down emotional states or more manic emotional states, like especially if like a grant is due or something like this. Everyone has sort of these triggers, and sleep is usually related to all of these. I often think about like what percentage of violent crime happens when someone is sleep deprived. I don't have the evidence for it yet, but I think a large amount of violent crime is probably the night before the person, had a sleep disturbance. And there's a lot of science that backs this up. I mean, there's even some that shows that being sleep deprived impacts your ability to have a sense of humor, because sense of humor is sort of this higher level functioning that comes from a place of, when you're sleep deprived, it's almost like your fight or flight system is activated. And that makes you, because you're telling your body that you're in a stressful situation, like, oh, we have to be up to forage for food more. And your body has these associations. So when you're sleep deprived, you kind of come at it from this place of scarcity more instead of, being fully regenerated in the day and coming at it from a higher level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's that amygdala, that part of your brain, which is that rapid response center, isn't it? And you're absolutely right. You lose your sleep and your amygdala is in absolute overdrive with all that rapid fire emotional response, because it's basically trying to think it needs to protect you, except we're no longer running away from lions, are we? So exactly. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
And to get into that whole system, just to add to it a little, so that whole system impacts like your cortisol and various hormones throughout the day. And that's when we think about the circadian rhythm. And having a healthy circadian rhythm is really the lever that we can use, every person can use to make sure that they have a deeper night of sleep.
So let's talk a little bit about that then, in terms of the how. How do you get that deeper night of sleep? I know you've done some research into sound. So how does that impact on your depth of sleep?
Yeah, so we did a crazy study at this laboratory at Penn State where we exposed people essentially to hundreds and thousands of sounds throughout the night without them consciously being aware of it at all, by looking at their brain waves and systematically delivering sounds based on their brain waves, basically. And so me and my team at Sleep Space understand sort of this, I think about it as like a tightrope walk between consciousness and unconsciousness, where there's sort of this hypnagogic state in between. And it's brief, but that's actually where a lot of the complexity in sleep occurs. And so we basically know how to use a sound to both disrupt you and how to block those disruptions. We don't want to disrupt you. how to sort of entrench different frequencies of your brain, delta or deep sleep in particular, and potentially in the future even do some weird dream manipulation. We haven't validated this yet, but basically we can use vibrations also on the Apple Watch to sort of entrench these different physiological states. And so we'll play sounds that emulate the delta frequency, and will vibrate your Apple Watch essentially in the frequency of your heart rate to sort of lull it into this relaxation state.
So you're saying the brain is mimicking an external sound wave internally and then mimicking that in its sleep waves. Is that essentially what's happening?
Yeah, so we're sort of entrenching. So we're just electrical so I think about people as just electrical currents essentially. And, you can interact with those currents. And when your brain is in deep sleep, for example, the whole cortex oscillates in this delta frequency. It's really quite magical. And the thought in the scientific literature, and this is what my TED Talk was about, is that we can play these sounds to mimic the delta wave. And when we did this laboratory experiment, we showed that we could increase delta, which was, and we have a published paper on this, but we actually didn't get one of our main goals was to show better cognition the next day. And that result didn't really flush out. So that's sort of the cool science of what we're working on. But there's also just simpler ways that everyone can use can do things that people can do to improve their deep sleep as well, with sounds, lights, and temperature.
Yep. Okay. All right. So you're talking about tech and wearable tech and Apple Watches and all sorts of things. And what do you think about wearable tech and measuring sleep and quality of sleep and quantity of sleep? Are we just, again, looking for too much data, or is this all really helpful? I mean, from my perspective, I'll get people coming up to me showing me my watch has said that I haven't had a good night's sleep, and yet they felt like they slept all night. But no, I didn't get the right quality of sleep. But they're not tired and they're feeling refreshed and they're able to concentrate, and yet really fixated on data. Where are we with all of this? What do you think is helpful and not helpful when it comes to tech?
Yeah, so as a technologist and a psychologist, it's really interesting to see how this plays out. And, I went to a behavioral sleep medicine conference a couple of years ago, and, the doctors don't like a lot of these devices for reasons that you just mentioned. And there's also a new concept in sleep called orthosomnia. Which is, if someone has insomnia, first off, if someone has insomnia versus if someone, and what I say is not medical, but just in what I've, I'm not a medical doctor, but, suggestions for insomnia are very different than if you're just trying to optimize your sleep. Oftentimes you would recommend the opposite. Like I might recommend a nap to an optimizer, but it's known, you should never nap if you're having problems falling asleep and staying asleep. So, there's a lot of nuances here, and people with insomnia are sort of high on the anxiety spectrum oftentimes. And when they see this data that says they got 10 minutes of deep sleep, it cranks up that anxiety. It does more harm than good. And this concept for the data doing more harm than good, they've coined orthosomnia, essentially. And so it's really important that you contextualize data. And, it's hard for people to understand this. And so many times I have to walk people off a ledge when they're telling me that their Aura data, told them that they got no deep sleep, for example. And Aura is great. We use it. We integrate with them. We also integrate with the Apple Watch and a lot of other things. And it's good at relative truth, from night to night. But it doesn't really, especially the deep sleep and the REM, it doesn't have a good sense of individual differences yet. So it could be massively off in terms of how, and we have a published paper where we've compared Apple Watch and we have algorithms for these, Apple Watch, Oura Ring, and PSG, which is gold standard. And so we see the margin of error, and they're great devices, but you just have to make sure you contextualize the information. So that's why we're working with the leading behavioral psychologists and cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, figuring out actually what they need to improve their practice and giving them that software and empowering them to create these new sleep environments for people that actually integrates with the therapy that they're delivering.
Okay. And is this Sleep Space? I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is the Sleep Space, and it's, a downloadable iPhone app for, you can try it out for free. We just want to make sure that it works for people first. And we're just about to launch this integration with that where you can have a coach or potentially in the future a clinician delivering their treatments using this platform that also integrates with lights in your bedroom, using sounds and potentially even temperature in the future. And when you optimize those things in your environment, you can sort of manipulate your circadian rhythm. And there's other things you can do to manipulate it too, to ensure that it's a stronger rhythm. And one of the best ways to get deep sleep is just to have a strong circadian rhythm. And there's so many things you can do in order to achieve that.
Okay, well, I'm fascinated by the lights in your background. So just tell us a little bit about the interplay between light and sleep as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, so light is one of the big things. So there's something called Zeitgebers. You can Google that. It's a German word for timekeeper. And there's these cues in our world that function as timekeepers for our organs. And actually every organ has their own rhythm to them too. And regularity in when you eat, exercise, get emotionally revved up or revved down, and the biggest one, sunlight. These are all those external cues that literally release hormones in your body that drive everything from when you're stressed to when you have a bowel movement, to when you're most alert and producing high frequency brain waves in your work life. And so we all know melatonin. And so sunlight basically inhibits melatonin. And that's the cue, the trigger that gets our bodies to wake up in the morning. And that's why we give melatonin to people at night, sometimes to give them the cue that now it's time to sleep. And so, I have for example, a happy lamp here too, that I just turned on just to make sure that every day you get 30 minutes of sunlight before 12. Like that's one of the key takeaways that everyone could benefit from. And it can be, they have happy lamps, or the best thing is just natural sunlight. Go for a walk.
And now, here is your lifestyle first prescription. Your 3 activating actions to take you from knowing to doing.
Have you got 3 things that you're really key to help people with that quality of deep sleep that you've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, number 1 is consistency, which I just want to emphasize again, because I kind of glossed over it. But being consistent in your sleep-wake schedule, when you go to bed, when you wake up, I've played with and sorry if I get long-winded, but, intermittent fasting can be great. But it's hard to sometimes have consistency in your meals with it. And sometimes then it can do more harm than good, is something that I've seen. It can be great, but you just have to be a little bit careful with that. Because you want consistent times of meals, essentially. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, just having a sound machine in your room. And, we use this dynamic pink noise, which I find very helpful. But any noises in your bedroom, you'd be surprised. Like even an air conditioner turning on, I've seen that turn on your brain. And you have all these brief brain awakenings throughout the night, actually, that you're not even consciously aware of. But if you have something like a sound machine, it'll sort of round out those noises to make you have a deeper quality sleep. And then the third one is sort of, and this is sort of generic, but know yourself. So, there's usually like 1 to 3 things that are particular to you. And so maybe just, think about what is going on in your sleep that's disruptive, whether it's an animal or, your sleep partner having different temperature needs than you, and, having a different blanket would help. Sometimes there's really simple wins in your sleep environment that you can think about for yourself.
No, absolutely love that. I think that last one's really, really critical. Is, you look at surveys. I was looking recently at the Great British Sleep Survey, and they said 46% of people don't sleep because of noise. 19% don't sleep because of light. Now, you don't want to be a statistic. You've got to know what is important for you, and it will be different things for different people. But once you know that, you've got to then do something about it, haven't you? So that's absolutely the key thing. So loved all of that. Really, really fascinating stuff, Daniel. And I'm sure people are going to want to hear more and tap into your research and find out more about you, and have a look at Sleep Space as well. So what's the best way to find out more or tap into you?
Yeah, just check out sleepspace.com. All of our science is there, and the software. And we just released this clinical sleep diary. So I think, we can finally start bringing together the medical community with some of these technologies in a way that's not producing more harm than good. And that is possible. It is possible for tech to do that. It just hasn't quite happened yet, I think.
Yeah, no, look, it's a fascinating space. It's growing. The research is growing. The importance is starting to be felt about sleep and its impact on pretty much everything. So I think you're absolutely right. The more intel and information we can get and use tech to our advantages, you say, use data to drive that determination rather than to take you away from it. That's kind of what we all need, don't we? And great access to good information. So thank you so much for sharing that. I will certainly put those links out onto the descriptors, and anyone who hasn't watched Daniel's talk, his TED talk, should certainly take a listen. Some great stuff on there as well. So thank you so much, Daniel. It's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you today. Thank you for all the information and insight you've given us today, which leaves me then to wish everyone listening a happy, healthy day.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifestyle First podcast, making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and we'd love it if you'd be kind enough to leave a review. To learn more or to arrange a consultation, please visit www.dralkapatel.com. See you next time.